Visit to the tomb of Mordechai and Esther in Iran, in Hamadan, in Persia.
ماندی بله.
Shushan, capital of PURIM.
Now I first want to give an overview. Who wrote the Megillah and what is the Megillah? Essentially, we believe the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, of the Chumash, were dictated word for word, letter by letter, by God to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Moshe did not make up a single phrase, except if he happened to say something in the course of the Exodus or whatever, that God later decided to incorporate into the Torah. Then God would have dictated to Moshe letter by letter that sentence or whatever that Moshe had spoken in his time. But the wording of the Torah from Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, until the last words of the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Nevo, Mount Nebo, and the nation mourning for him, every word was dictated by God, letter by letter. Certain words are spelled incorrectly, and they're spelled incorrectly on purpose. Lessons and laws are learned, even in cases where the words are spelled incorrectly. Therefore, we remain careful when we write Torah scrolls that the scrolls must be written exactly as we have them in the tradition. They could be different sizes, but actually, even in that, there are certain customs that apply to every handwritten Torah scroll, and it must be handwritten on a certain kind of ink, on a certain kind of papyrus, etc. The other books of the Bible, there are 24 books of Tanakh, 24 books of the Torah and the Hebrew Bible. Are the other 19 books, our tradition is that God inspired certain people at different points in our history to sit and write their books. Those books were written Baruch HaKodesh. God did not dictate a single letter or word, but inspired them to write not only accurately and wholly, but in a certain style such that we learn out things from their writing as well, from their style, from why they chose certain words. Who wrote those books? Joshua wrote the book of Joshua when we came into the land of Israel. Later, Samuel, Shmuel the prophet, wrote many of the next books, not only the books of Shoftim, Judges, but the book of Ruth, which takes place at the same time. We have a tradition that he wrote the first book of Shmuel Aleph, but then he had passed away. We have a tradition that Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, wrote the books of Kings, First Kings, Second Kings, Melachim Aleph, Melachim Bet, his own book, Yirmiyahu, Echa, the book of Lamentations. We have a tradition that Solomon, King Solomon, wrote many of the poetic books, Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs, and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, and several of those books. David, King David, David HaMelech wrote the Psalms, with a few exceptions. Within the 150 Psalms, some were written by others. One was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, for example. That's who wrote the books. Who wrote the book of Esther? We have a tradition that Mordechai primarily wrote the book of Esther. There's something to know about the book of Esther that makes it different from all 23 other books of Tanakh. And the word Tanakh is 3 Hebrew letters. Tav stands for Torah, first 5 books. N, Tanakh. N, Nun, Navi, all the prophet books. Yoshua and Shoftim, Judges, Shmuel, Samuel, Malachim, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, etc., etc. Those are the Nevi'im, the prophets. And then Ch, Ketuvim, Tanakh. The Kaf, last letter in the word, so it's made into a final Kaf, a Chaf Sofit. Ketuvim, the writings. That's the more literary books like Psalms and Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, etc. Our tradition is that uniquely among the 24 books, Mordechai, in writing it, followed certain rules that he basically set for himself. His goal was to write a book that would be disseminated after the story and the miracles played themselves out, that would be disseminated among the Jews throughout the entire 127 provinces over which Achashverosh, Ahasuerus reigned. All those provinces. Well, we know first of all that we're very careful about God's name when we write it. And that's why many of us, even when we're writing in English, write G-D rather than G-O-D, so that if someone takes it and throws it in the garbage, the word God will not appear in garbage, just G-D. Others among the Orthodox are not strict about that because of, well, that's an English word. The Hebrew word, Elohim, Hashem, yes, we write differently from the way it's spelled. But G-D, it's not his name. First of all, the word God is only a pronoun for his name, and it's English, so what? And others say, even so, it's not any all pronoun. But we're very careful that God's name not be thrown away, because Mordechai was disseminating among 127 provinces, and it would have to get through non-Jewish emissaries and messengers who would deliver it, and would have to get through local governing authorities. He made the decision never to have the word God in the entire Megillah. It's the only book of the 24 books of the Bible, of the Tanakh, in which the word God does not appear in any shape or form. Another thing to know, critical to understanding the story, is that he had to get through the censors. It had to get the approval of the king, and it had to get through other censors, primarily the king. So if he wanted to tell a true story, true enough that it would be in the Tanakh, the Bible, he had to tell it in a way that was not brutally true, because the king not only would have prevented the book from going through. At that time, Mordechai was like number 2 in the kingdom. Overnight, he would have been not only deposed, maybe executed, if he really, really told the story in its full depth. So without lying, he just massaged details and avoided certain details. Those of you who know me know that I have a very positive feeling of Trump. I'm not getting into it for political purposes, but to make points. And Trump is the closest we have alive today to compare to an autocrat. He's not. He's a constitutional leader. And I'm for him. But he's my best example. If you're going to write a book that's got to get past Trump and get disseminated to every country where we have a United States embassy, you can't write it the way Zelensky would write it. If you don't know how to get words through Trump, you're finished. The man has an ego, and I like him. Again, I'm not going to get into all of this. I like him, and he's the best we've ever had for Israel. He's the best. 500 years from now, if Mashiach has not come, we will look back and recognize he was the best president that ever was in America for Israel and Jews. So that's how much I like him. But on the other hand, we're honest here. This is a Torah class, not political science. And imagine if you just forget to thank him the right way, or you forget to compliment him the right way. So now you're dealing, instead of president who does get elected, you're dealing with a king who rules by fiat, wasn't elected, won't be elected, and goes around killing his wife, as he did to Vashti, because they had an exchange of words, and he didn't like those words. So Mordechai whitewashed the book. The Talmud, which is later, gives us more information. The Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud, the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud, they don't have to get through Achashverosh, and they tell it like it is. Where did they get it from if they're from another generation? Because there was a tradition handed down through Midrash from generations. King Achashverosh was evil. The Megillah conveys he's one of the heroes and good guys. In fact, he was evil. He wanted the Jews destroyed. He supported Haman. Thing is, he didn't know that Esther was Jewish. And as he came to have an affinity towards her, he changed his views on Jews, just as, for all I know, and I don't know, for all I know, part of Trump's incredible support of Israel and Jews may stem from one of his daughters converting to Orthodox Judaism, for all I know. And that may have, if it didn't completely change it may have impacted him in a way he will carry for the rest of his life, as long as she remembers to compliment him. And so it's important to read the Megillah and understand that there are things that are written through code, and I'll point them out. And now we go into the story. The Jews were living in the 127 provinces, much as Jews do today. Before the exile, we all lived in Israel. After the Babylonian exile, we were all over the place. There were always some Jews still in Israel. We are indigenous. There never was a time in all of Jewish history from the moment we entered under Joshua that the land was Judenrein, that there were not Jews living in Eretz Israel. The image of Nebuchadnezzar exiling us, Jews also remained behind. The Romans exiling us, Jews continued behind as well in the city of Yavne, for example, creating the famous yeshiva of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And so Jews always were in Israel. But the vast majority of Jews upon exile were all over the place as we are today. We're in the United States, in England, France, even in Germany. How Jews went back to, we're even in Germany. Arab countries, Iran. There's some Jews that didn't get out. Those with their wits got out. Some fools stayed behind when the opportunity arose. Soviet Union. Most of our grandparents, those of us Ashkenazic, stem from Jews who were smart enough to get out before the communists. But there were fools like Bernie Sanders of his day who really thought the communists would be the answer to all their, as Bernie Sanders still thinks, and they stayed behind. And the next thing you knew, my generation was busy marching in the streets to free Soviet Jewry. And when we finally got them out of the Ukraine and Georgia and all the Soviet Union, Jews stayed behind as well, so that we would have something to demonstrate for once Putin is replaced by another Stalin. Jews in Arab countries, they're actually now, in the last few weeks, are fools who are applying to the new president of Syria, himself ISIS, having overthrown Assad, who is Al-Qaeda. They are now applying to him for the right to return to Syria, Damascus and Aleppo, to return to their homeland from Israel. And these fools, their children and grandchildren will need my children and grandchildren to be marching for them. There are Jews everywhere in the world now, and that's what it was like then, throughout the 127 provinces. But just as now, the largest exile is the United States by far and away, perhaps more than half of all exilic Jews are in America. Thus it was in Iran, Persia. And the story begins, and I hesitate to use the word story because that normally is associated with fiction, and we believe everything here is true. So the narrative begins with Achashverosh having a national banquet to celebrate the anniversary of his kingship. And he runs a huge banquet initially for the entire kingdom. And then after the big one, he continues with a smaller one for the people in his region, and then a final smaller one for a week for the people in his city. And it's a little bit like when Andrew Jackson became president of the United States. He was the 7th president. He was a populist, and the first one who felt he wanted to open the White House to the people, the people's house. And for his inauguration, unlike the first 6, Washington, John Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, he decided to invite everyone in America into the White House to celebrate with him. And you had quite an ornery group of people from all over the place, came with shotguns and and the hats. Think of Daniel Boone, Tennessee, and that crowd, and they were shooting up the White House. Not January 6th, and I'm not taking sides on that. Not like January 6th. They just came to celebrate and shoot up the White House, shoot in the sky. It was wild scene. That's what Achashverosh did, but he didn't let the riffraff into the palace. He had them outside in the courtyards. And the political leaders, they were allowed in the house, and it culminated in the big final night celebration. This was for the creme de la creme. Okay. Now, Achashverosh, two things. The Jews in those days, all Jews, were Orthodox. There was no such thing as reform until 200 years ago, and it won't be around in another 100 years. And conservative Judaism is always 10 days behind reform. Gets formed 10 days behind. They adopt each innovation 10 days later, and they'll disappear 10 days later. Jews have always been Orthodox. And we're broken into two groups, those who are Orthodox and don't keep everything, and those who do. The best version to get the picture are Sephardic Jews, Jews who hail from North Africa. They're not Reform or conservative. They're Jews. And they tell you, I'm Dati or I'm Chiloni. I'm an Orthodox Jew, I keep the religion, or I'm an Orthodox Jew and I don't keep the religion. How can you be an Orthodox Jew and not keep the religion? Because God forbid, if there's a death, they want an Orthodox rabbi. If they choose to go to a place on Yom Kippur, they want an Orthodox rabbi. After October 7, they went to Orthodox shuls. So that's what the Jews of Persia were like. And therefore they kept Shabbat and they were kosher. And they had no business being at that banquet because the banquet was not kosher. It's very important. And it wasn't like today where you can go to certain non-kosher programs and request a kosher meal. And if it's a very high class program, they'll give you a high class replacement meal. I've been to some of those, very few. They normally list me with the riffraff, but I've been to some places where those special order kosher meals are better than the best kosher restaurants. And that's available. But it doesn't seem that that was available there and then. And therefore, they had no business being there, even if they only ate the fruit. God, according to the Midrash, determined at that banquet, he would punish the Jews severely. They had reached a point like American Jews today, or like American Jews 8 years ago, that they became convinced this is my country. I'm equal to everybody else. It will never happen here. This is not Germany, and this is not Spain, and this is not, it's not going to happen here. I'm equal. I can get into any school. I could run for vice president of the United States as Joe Lieberman did with Al Gore, and I could be the Senate Majority Leader like Schumer, and I could be anything. I could be most important doctor and the most important this and the most important that, and this country's my country. I can be anti-Christian in public and fight Christian symbols and take court cases to the Supreme Court and attack Christianity because this is my country just like theirs. Who do they think they are? Those left-wing Jews who make up perhaps a majority of American Jews. And that's what the Jews had become like in Persia. And they got it in their heads. We're just like everyone else. And according to our faith and our Midrash, we are not like everyone else. We're not better. We don't have better DNA. We're not smarter. We have no business having our nose in the air. But we're not like everyone else because we have a Torah and Shabbat and Kashrut, and we live by those laws. That's what makes us different. Nothing else. They, like American Jews, forgot. And we're getting punished now. And it's no coincidence, I believe. I don't have a text to prove it. And I'm sure there are good rabbis who would say, you're overdoing it, Dove. But I believe it is not coincidental that it's happening here. And you know what I mean when I say it's happening here, all over the place, specifically in the era that we have a president with an Orthodox daughter, and then the next president, his son is married to a Jew, and the vice president is married to a Jew, and the speaker of the Senate majority leader is a Jew, and you have Jews all over the place, and you have a Jew on the Supreme Court, and you have Jewish presidents in the Ivy League, and boy, we're here to stay. And I believe God is sending us a message. You are not here to stay unless you live by my laws. Then I continue to protect you as I have for the last 200 years. And if you forget who you are, well, just you'll see. So the Jews forgot who they are. And God decided, I am going to severely bring to your attention who you are not. You are not equal Persians. You are Jews, and thus it will unfold. And if you return to me and to my laws, it'll get close, but I will save you. You'll come out even better. Understanding this time that it's happening not because you're equal, but because you have God's unique protection. And so it will be here. One way or another, we'll find out. So they're having the banquet, and on the last night, the king gets drunk. He's drinking a lot of wine. They emphasize the wine at the banquet. It says, according to the Midrash, that every person of the hundreds, perhaps thousands, at the banquet was given a choice. What country's wine vintage would you like? We have wine from every one of our 127 provinces. Would you like a Bordeaux? Actually, that was not part of the 127 provinces, but the same idea. Would you like Napa Valley? Would you like a Bordeaux? Would you like a Pinot Noir? Would you like a Portofino, if that's what it's called, from Portugal? Something out of Chile. What would you like? A nice Israeli wine. And so you could pick your wine, pick your year. As the king, he had everything. People were drinking wine like crazy, and they were celebrating. And the king could not hold his liquor. And Mordechai could not put that into the text. So you have to read it, even without the Talmud spelling it out. You read it in the text by seeing what the king does after the text goes out of its way to tell you they're all drinking. And then what the king says. And you connect the dots. Why is the text telling us that they were drinking? To understand that the king couldn't hold his liquor. People start talking. I, for one, have been in a bar only once in my life, not counting bar mitzvahs. I've been in a bar. I don't drink much. Uh, Now that I'm on the immunosuppressant meds, I don't drink at all by medical orders. But I've never been a drinker, except on Shabbat. I would drink wine a bunch, but otherwise not big into liquor either. Um, but people drink, and there are bars. I never went to a bar. An Orthodox Jew, a rabbi doesn't go to a bar. In fact, the only time is in jokes. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi walk into a bar. The only time I ever went into a bar was when Professor Scarf, one of my freshman professors at Columbia, wanted to have a meeting with me to discuss my paper. And he said, meet me at O'Leary's. And I was quite leery, but he wanted to meet me there. So while he was scarfing it down, I was discussing my paper. Well, non-Jews drink. It's like an inside joke among Jews. A shikar is a goy. I won't translate it. Google it. It's an expression. There's a song to that title. Jews don't drink a little bit, and we go out of our way in our culture and religion twice a year. Purim, because there's so much wine in the storyline of the Megillah, in memory of how miracles took place because of wine and inebriation, and on Simchat Torah. Other than that, it stands out. Those are the 2 days we drink wine. In other words, the other 352 days of the lunar calendar, we do not drink wine particularly. You have a l'chaim, you Shabbos, bris, whatever. Okay. Now, Vashti was the queen. Vashti had incredible yichus, incredible lineage. The Jews had been exiled by Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the evil king in the book of Jeremiah and Second Kings at the end, who exiled us and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, the first holy temple. After he died, his son became king. His son's name was Evil-Merodach. And that son died, and the next king was Belshazzar. Belshazzar had a daughter, according to the Midrash, named Vashti. So Vashti was granddaughter of the man who burned the first Beit HaMikdash, of Nebuchadnezzar. She came from a viciously anti-Semitic background. At the end of Belshazzar's reign, a premature reign that God cut short, Darius of Persia, the Persian Empire, conquered the Babylonian Empire, and that's the end of the Babylonian Empire. Darius, some say Achashverosh was the son of Darius, Daryavish of Persia. Darius, to make his son greater, aggrandize him, took the daughter of the king, the then regnant king of Babylonia, Vashti, and married her off, perhaps against her will, to his son, Achashverosh, Ahasuerus. She had contempt for him because she felt she came from true nobility and royalty, Babylonia, and the Persians were lowlives who defeated our people in battle. Okay, they won. They're better fighters. But we, Babylonians, are nobility, and Persians are drek, as they would say in Babylonia. So she was an anti-Semite and a vicious woman. And the Megillah says it because that was safe to get through the censors, because Achashverosh agreed. She would prance around naked because she felt she had a most beautiful body. But what kind of woman would prance around naked? In honor of our Purim class 2 weeks ago, the High Honorable artist Kanye West, who prefers to be known as Ye, Kanye West pranced his current wife, or whatever she is, basically naked in front of the entire world, just like Vashti. The only question is, did she do it out of her own arrogance or out of that maniac's idea? So Vashti was like that. But in certain circles, she did not do it. If she felt it was elegant society, she did not do it. But she made her very many, many maids and servants work always naked. And particularly, she degraded and dehumanized the Jewish servants. She specifically made them work on Saturdays, on their Sabbath. And she dehumanized them, sexually and in other ways. On the night of the greatest celebration of the banquet, with Achashverosh drunk. He was sitting at a table, a dais, with 6 or so of his highest officers. And they got to talking the way that men start talking at a bar when you read about in the next day's paper some wild bar fight the night before where people shot each other. So normally they don't come to the bar to shoot each other. They come to the bar as best friends, and after enough drinks, they're murdering each other. Shikar is a guy. And so what you had happen is they got into a discussion about women. What else for men to talk about when they're drunk? And they weren't talking about brilliant women, okay? They weren't talking about Madame Curie. They were talking about women's body parts. And they got into a long, extended, the word is not discussion, but an argument. Which country's body part, women's, have the best body parts? I once saw an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry is in an Uber, and it starts off nicely enough. And as they're talking, somehow, as only happens in Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry's talking about beautiful woman he knows or whatever, and the driver, a Romanian, now in America, starts talking about the world's most beautiful women are Romanian women. And they get into a big fight. Are the most beautiful women in the world Romanian or American? And the next thing you know, the Uber driver throws him out of his car and gives him a 0 rating, and no one in Uber will pick him up again. So that's what you're starting with. So they get into that fight, and the king says, well, his advisors say, if your people, your Persian people are the most beautiful women, why don't you prove it? He says, I will. And he gives the order, I want my wife, Vashti, to show up naked right now, stand basically on a table, and let them look her over front and back, up and down. He would never have done that if he were sober. He's hardly ever sober, so perhaps he did it more often. He's drunk, but she's not. She already looks down upon him as coming from an abased culture compared to her nobility, and sends a message back. I will not do that, you drunk fool. My grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, could drink casks of wine and hold his liquor. You can't hold a simple little cup without making a fool of yourself. And that was not the communication to send to him on that night. And she sent it with instructions to the emissary to read it out loud. Well, you saw, again, with apologies to Trump, everyone in the world has seen that meeting with Zelensky. You saw the meeting started nicely, and then just 1 or 2 words, and you saw what that turned into. Next thing you know, Zelensky got thrown out of the White House. I hope you were here at the beginning so you understand the context. I don't mean, I'm just giving an example to bring it to life, because it's real. Achashverosh lost his cool. He was not a constitutional president, but a king with no sobriety at the time. Interesting, Trump does not drink alcohol. His entire life, he doesn't drink. Um, the king basically gave orders, I want her executed. Now, it does not say explicitly in the Megillah that the king said she should come in naked because they couldn't get it through. They wouldn't dare try to put that through the king's censorship. He's supposed to look like he's quite a king. So instead, the text says the king ordered that she be brought in with her queen crown. She be brought in with her queenly crown. What does that mean? She's always wearing a crown. If she's coming in a royal function, of course she's wearing a crown. Why does it say he ordered that she be brought in with her crown? The understanding is only her crown, nothing else. The Midrash tells us that she might have been willing to do that because she was that arrogant about her appearance. However, God had business to conclude with her as well for what she had done. You had humiliated and degraded my holy women, the Jewish women, making them prance naked and degraded them. So I am going to degrade you to your death naked. You are being asked to come naked, and right before she would have come, if she would have come, God struck her with leprosy on her entire body. And there is a midrash that God sent the angel Gabriel, who caused her to grow a tail, Tail, from her backside, assuring she was so unpresentable that she would not go, would send such a message, and the king basically was was fit to be tied, asked his advisors, what should I do? And the advisors said, you can't let her do that. No one can talk to the king that way. You need to get rid of her. And so the king had her executed. 1, 2, 3. And he further was advised and therefore miraculously agreed to issue a decree, a gezerah, throughout the entire 127 provinces by order and decree of your king. Henceforth, all women in the empire or kingdom are to treat their husbands with respect. End of decree. Now, these last few weeks, you get an idea. Same when Biden first took over. Executive orders, and it's all over the country. Everybody knows about the executive order, and everybody knows it's going to be this, it's going to be that. Biden has hit Trump did his executive orders in 2016. In 2020, Biden asked for all the Trump orders of 2016 and issued orders. Don't pay any attention to them. 2020, Trump, or whatever it was, 2020, and Trump now is sending out, yeah, pay attention to them. This was a rare executive order of the king. All women are to treat their husbands with respect. Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha, brings out, this is a great miracle for the Jewish people. It showed the people of the kingdom that the guy is a nut. You see, you may feel right now that your current president is a nut if you're an American, or your previous, or both. They're in the news every day. You follow the news about them every day. In those days, there was no TV, no electronic communications, radio, texting. Many people did not know that their king was a nut. They assumed that, just like the kings of Babylonia, this was a guy not to be trifled with, and a serious guy. And that decree sent the message, your king is a nut. Perhaps women should respect their husbands in that empire at that time, monarchy. But a king does not issue an executive order to that effect. And this was powerful because later he's going to issue an executive order. He doesn't know it, but God knows it, that all Jews in the kingdom ought to be killed. And people will not know whether to take that message, that decree seriously because of this decree. They will know he's a nut. And if he's drunk, he issues a decree. And the next day he cancels the decree or he doesn't enforce it. And before you start killing Jews because the decree says so, better wait, because if he changes his mind and you killed a Jew, he may issue another decree that anybody who followed the previous decree is to be executed. Saved our lives that he issued that fool decree. Second chapter. We're going to be introduced to Mordechai, Mordechai HaYehudi, Mordechai the Jew. The Megillah refers to him as Mordechai HaYehudi. Yehudi means Jew. Mordechai the Jew, and he's a son of Kish Ish Yemini. He's an Ish Yemini, which could mean a right-handed man, based on the Hebrew word Yamin. But it also was common to refer to Benjaminites. We were still in those days divided among our 12 tribes. And Binyamin, because it's a lot of syllables, unlike Yehuda, Binyaminim were referred to as Yeminim for short. So it is understood by the rabbis that Mordechai was a Benjaminite from the tribe of Benjamin. At the same time, the rabbis wonder why he's called a Yehudi, a Jew. Everybody in the story is either a Persian anti-Semite or a Jew. They're all Jews. So just as they wonder why emphasize that she's told to come in with her crown, why emphasize that he's a Benjaminite? And why emphasize that he's a Jew, a Yehudi? They infer that it's not really meaning Yehudi, Jew, but Yehudi of the tribe of Judah, Yehuda. So he's from the tribe of Judah, and he's the tribe of Benjamin. So how does that work out? One parent, one parent. That his father was from the tribe of Benjamin, and his mother was from the tribe of Judah, and that made him a Benjaminite because your tribe is based on your father. As even nowadays, the one tribe we still continue to carefully monitor is Levi and Kohen, same tribe, different branches. If your father's a Levi, you're a Levi. Your father's Kohen. If your mother is a Levi, but your father's a Benjaminite, so we don't know what tribe your father was if he's not Kohen Levi. So we just know you're not a Kohen Levi. So why is it important that he's a Benjaminite? There's something unique about the tribe of Benjamin, a lot of things. They provided the first king of Israel, Saul. All subsequent kings of Israel are from the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. King David, and down the line, Shlomo, Chizki, Achaz, Chizki, all the way down the line to Mashiach, the Messiah, will come from the line of Judah. But the first king was from Benjamin. And our Tuesday night class, where we learned First Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, we learned all about that. So he's a Benjaminite. And there are several things about Benjaminites. Number one, they hail from the original tribe of the king, the original king. But pertinent here, something very subtle. In the times of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yaakov ended up in the house of Lavan, his father-in-law, father of both Leah and Rachel, as well as his uncle, because his father-in-law was also brother to his mother, Rivka, Rebecca. And he was there like 20 years of persecution, 20 horrible years. He describes in the Torah that he had no sleep for 20 years, was meant to sleep outdoors in the freezing winter for 20 years. Anyway, the moment came where Rachel finally was the last of the matriarchs to have a baby. There was, Leah had Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and then Rachel gave her handmaiden Bilhah. She gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. Then Leah gave her handmaiden Zilpah, who gave birth to Gad and Asher. Then Leah gave birth to two more, Yisachar and Zvulun, that was 10. And Rachel gave birth to Yosef, 11. And with the birth of a child to Rachel, Yaakov made the decision, we're getting out of here. And they got out of there. And to go back to his family, Yitzchak, Rivka had passed away, he had to go past an area that was being ruled by his brother Esav, who 20 years earlier wanted to murder him. That's what actually drove Yaakov to flee from his family to his uncle Lavan, who later became the father-in-law when he married them. So he had to get past Esav. And the last he had seen him was 20 years ago. And there were no telephones or emails or texting or WhatsApp to find out, do you still want to murder me? So the assumption was he still wants to murder me. But I have nowhere to go except back to mom and dad. And that means getting past that area. So I'm going to take my chances, pray to God. And he went with his 4 wives. Some say 2 wives, 2 handmaidens, Zilpah and Bilhah. Some say they became wives as well. And his 11 children and his flocks of sheep and cattle. And they went back, mostly sheep. And they had to get past that region Esav controlled. And we're told that Yaakov spent the day praying and preparing gifts to give Esav. to mollify him and preparing to fight. And the next day, Esav came with 400 men. He was the head of a gang, of a battalion. He was a warlord. And he came with 400 men. And we actually learned one Tuesday night how, as a merit that those 400 men did not slaughter the Jews, their descendants at a later time, their lives was spared. In a different situation, they were Amalekites. And when David was slaughtering Amalekites, he let 400 men go because those 400 men. We learned that on a Tuesday night. So as Esav was there and Yaakov didn't know whether he would try to murder him, Yaakov kneeled and bowed down, something Jews don't do. But that had not yet become the Jewish tradition. Many of our traditions are going to start at Mount Sinai and even afterwards. He bowed down, and all of his children bowed down and prostrated, and his wives bowed down, prostrated. Think of the image of Muslims in their mosques, how they just go spread out. The story continues. Esav ends up not killing him, kissing him. Some say kissed him to kill him. Some say kissed him honestly. And Yaakov continued, and when he reached around Tekoa, Rachel went into labor and gave birth to her final child, died in labor, ultimately being buried next door in Bethlehem. And Rachel gave birth to Binyamin. So this is something I'm going to say now no one ever thinks about. Benjamin is the only Jew who had no tradition of bowing down. It was a source of pride for all time to come in the tribe of Benjamin. We are the ones who never bowed down, because he was born after the Esav prostrating. And it's like in the United States. Different states have different sources of whatever. Some are just descriptive. Florida because of their sunshine and California because of their sunshine. But then there are states that Empire State, New York. But then there are some states that live free or die. And the show me state. You could have a game naming the 50 slogans. And for many of those states, the Lone Star State, there's pride. Our state, we fought. The rest of you guys became free on our tails. You rode on our backs. We were the ones, live free or die, while you were bathing in sunshine. And so Benjamin, they took pride. This is our defining aspect. We don't bow down to anyone. Mordechai was a Benjaminite. It is important to know that. That's part of why he would not bow down to Haman. All the other Jews were saying, come on, to save a Jewish life, you're allowed to, if your wife is going into labor on Shabbos, you put her in the car, you drive to the hospital, even though you're not supposed to drive on Shabbos. If the doctor says you better eat something on Yom Kippur, or because of your situation, you have to do what the doctor says, and so on and so forth. You can bow down to this guy if that's going to save the Jewish people. Well, not me. I'm a Benjaminite. We just don't bow. Sorry. And as a result of his stubbornness not to bow down, he brought near disaster on the Jewish people. Haman decides, I despise this guy, and I'm going to wipe out his people. Now, this is important, as is everything I'm trying to get in tonight. Haman is an Amalekite. He's referred to in chapter 2 as Haman ha-Agagi, Haman the Agagite. What is an Agagite? Agag was a king of the Amalekites, Amalekite. He was symbolic, a metaphor for the Amalekites. Amalekites became known as Agagites. it would be like calling. I got myself into trouble here. I'll skip that. To uh, Agagite. Haman the Agagite is an Amalekite. In chapter 15 of 1 Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, the prophet Samuel instructed, by word of God, instructed King Saul to absolutely eradicate the Amalekites the way, may it be in our days, we see Hamas eradicated, and Hezbollah, and Fatah, and all of them. He was told to eradicate, and King Saul went to war and he killed every Amalekite, but he left the king alive. And God came to the prophet Samuel and said, I regret ever having designated Saul to be king of Israel, and I'm withdrawing the kingship from him. There will be no dynasty. His son Jonathan will not reign, and I will hand the kingship, the dynasty, to another family more worthy. And we all know that became David and his son. So Samuel goes to Saul and hands him the horrifically bad news. But I killed all the Amalekites. I only left the king alive. Showed him a little respect. That's why you're losing the kingship. You did not respect your kingship. Going back to what I started with earlier tonight, you're a king of the Jews, of the people who keep Shabbat and who are kosher and keep Torah law. He is nothing. His title king is like other kings. It's not like king of the Jews. And so you've lost it. So the question is, if anyway, he killed everybody but this one last guy who's now in prison, in jail. And soon after, Samuel himself executes him by word of God. Since you, Saul, did not do it, I'll do it myself. And this elderly prophet kills Agag. So the obvious question is, if he's the last Amalekite standing, and he's not standing more than a few days, how does Haman turn out to be an Amalekite? There were no more Amalekite. Well, there are different opinions, and one of them is that during his day or two or three in custody, he managed to impregnate a woman, one of his jailers. I used to find that, but I'm a believer. I'm an Orthodox rabbi. And forget about that I'm rabbi. I really believe everything I teach. So how could it be? You know how I know how I've referred today to Trump and to executive orders and to Zelensky. I love to find current events things that, by golly, it shows the impossible to believe biblical account really could happen. So bear with me a moment, which I guess you've been doing till now. I'd like you to read something I saw about a year ago in Times of Israel and other papers. Get this. Times of Israel. Former prison guard details her alleged rape at hands of terror inmate. Hila tells Channel 12 she was left alone with Arab prisoner who assaulted her on a number of occasions. Claims her superiors knew of his penchant for her. Former prison guard who claims she was repeatedly raped by a terror inmate during her service at the Gilboa prison 7 years ago. Haaretz, Israeli prison chief on trial for enabling Palestinian prisoners' rape. No such thing as Palestinians. They're Arabs. There's no such thing as Palestine. For enabling Palestinian prisoners' rape of female guards, plural. Prison commander and officer were charged with failing to address complaints by female. They were complaining to him about sexual offenses committed by a prisoner. The guard said, 6 years we were called liars. Now justice will prevail. I-24 News, after rape claim, Israel to bar female soldiers from serving as prison guards. Gantz says, this was when he was prime minister briefly, or whatever he was. Gantz said, actually he wasn't, he was defense minister. Gantz says those directly handling terrorists should receive special training. Fools didn't figure that out until then. So it turns out a Jewish prison guard guarding Arab terrorists, she's got the guns and the rifles and the handcuffs and chains, and all he's got is Arab terrorist, and he may have had a baby for all I know. I don't know if they did abortions then, but it turns out such a thing could be, that Haman could impregnate a Jewish prison guard or cook. Okay. So Mordechai is the Jewish leader. He's a member of Anshe Knesset Agdola. There were 70 of the greatest Torah giants, perhaps in all of history, who were gathered as the great men of assembly, or the men of the great assembly. They had been exiled. They were part of the exile in Babylonia. And many of them came back to Israel when Darius of Persia, permitted Jews to start returning after he conquered Babylonia. And some of them, like Mordechai, ended up going to Persia, where Darius was king of this empire, and later his son Achashverosh becomes the king of that empire. So that's how this man of the great assembly from Babylonia finds his way into Persia, because the Jews of Persia, having scattered all over the world, as we discussed earlier, needed a great Torah scholar to be their leader too. It's like in America, a great American Torah community, second largest in the world after Israel, must have great Torah leaders too. In my lifetime, there's been Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I could list many others of that caliber and greatness. Zichronam Livracha. May their memories be for a blessing. So Mordechai, as a member of the Great Assembly, all of them knew 70 different languages. Sounds hard to believe, but that almost is true of Zev Jabotinsky, the great Zionist leader of the 20th century, who first organized Jews as a fighting element against pogroms in Russia, and then came to Israel, where he formed the Haganah to fight back against Arab murderers. And then when the Haganah started getting a little bit soft and too cozy with the British occupation, his people formed another group, the Irgun. And the Irgun had their strategies, but as far as targeted assassinations, they didn't believe in targeted assassinations, just general blowing up military installations of the British. So the Lehi was formed by Yair Stern, and they did the assassinations of Lord Moyne and Count Folke Bernadotte and stuff. Okay. So in the same sense, Jabotinsky, on top of being the greatest modern warrior of Jewish history, Zionist history, was also a literary giant, was one of the greatest novelists in Russia, really so. And he wrote poetry in like 30 languages or something, or he was fluent in 30 and he wrote poetry in 6. And so men of Anshe Knesset Agdola knew 70 languages. Okay. Now, this becomes important because what happens is an assassination plot unfolds. Two men, Bigtan and Teresh, and there's a debate what prompted them. They plot to assassinate the king. But why? For this, we go back a step. Remember how the king had, in his drunken stupor, had his wife executed? After a little while, he got lonely. He sobered up, and whether it was she whom he missed or just having a wife around, he was lonely. And his advisors advised him to get married again. Oh, he's the king. And he cares very much. He believes the women in his kingdom are the most physically beautiful that exist, with clothes on, without clothes on. And so he decrees a nationwide beauty contest, a little bit different from Miss America and Miss Universe and Miss World and whatever. And also, you don't have to answer a question about how you, as Miss Persia, will bring peace to the world. Um, the idea was that every single woman, some say every woman, even married, but most are of the opinion it was only single women, was taken by his couriers from all over his 127 province kingdom to be brought and to be held and to be assessed for who should be the next queen. He had two buildings, two sort of encampments. One was headed, they were both headed respectively by people whom he unicized, made eunuchs of them, because they were going to be single-handedly in charge of hundreds and thousands of unattached women in their 20s, 30s, and to keep him dutiful to the king. If you got that job, it meant being made a eunuch. So the one in charge of all the single women that he was in charge of, mostly like prospective, he didn't have usually all the single women, but now he did. And among them, he took a particular, hundreds and thousands, he miraculously took a particular liking to Esther. Why? Maybe she was pretty. Maybe she hummed his favorite melody when she took a shower. They didn't have showers. What am I talking about? Maybe she was popular for this reason, treated him nicely. Most people treat underlings contemptuously. I remember when I practiced law at a big firm, it was always my practice to be more respectful to the secretaries than any other lawyer at the firm. And people said, "You're too nice to them." And partly I'm an Orthodox rabbi who happened for 10 years to be a lawyer, but it's in my soul. You treat people nicely. And also strategically, it turned out I got certain I got certain advantages. The secretaries liked me. So when I was stuck with extra work late at night, they would say, "For you, I'll type up this brief. You don't have to do it yourself at 3 in the morning." Or they had nighttime typists. They would fight with each other. "I'll do Doves." So there's a thing about being nice to lower people. And it's right, because everybody's a human being. And most are nicer because they're from humble status. Anyway, so he liked her. And therefore he gave her advantages to help her out. How's he going to help her out? What's he going to do? He can't. Is he going to do a nose job? So what he did was he gave her better cosmetics. You all know there's the top of the line cosmetics they sell at Neiman Marcus and Bloomingdale's, and then there's the cosmetics they sell at the at the dollar store, if they still have a dollar store or a dime store, whatever they call it. And so he gave her better cosmetics. He gave her better lotions, perfumes. So he gave her every possible advantage. And it was also arranged, okay, now that you're beautiful and how did this contest go? It was basically a 1 year contest. For 1 year, the text says, Ba'erev hi ba'a, uvaboker hi shava. Each night for 1 year, a different lady from among the candidates, namely all the single women in Persia, were married also, Every night, another one was sent to spend the night with the king in his palace. But Erev Hiba'ah, at night, evening, she went in, Uva Boker Hishava, and in the morning she returned. The calendar, both Jewish and and other places before the modern era, is a 354-day calendar or 383 days in a leap year. Every night, another woman, and all the others never got to be candidates. The guy in charge designated the 354 or 383 who would get a tryout. All the others were sent home, which was their good fortune. It was no mitzvah. It was no advantage to be a candidate, because if you did not get chosen, you slept with the king that night. Now you could think, well, it's still a thing to sleep with the king, something you can carry with you all your life that most women could never say. I slept with the king. Under the rules of Persia, any woman who ever slept with the king automatically became part of his permanent harem for life, and never, even after his death, would be permitted to be intimate with another man. Since the king had, therefore, it would be disrespectful to the king for her body to be invaded by anyone else, even voluntarily. So nothing could be worse than being one of the finalists. This guy, nevertheless, was pushing for Esther. He didn't even know who she is. He knew her as Esther. Her real name was not Esther. Esther is a Babylonian idolatrous name, Ishtar, Ishtar. It's one of the Babylonian goddesses. Her parents named her Ishtar. Why would a Jewish family in Babylonia name a child Ishtar? Why would a Jewish family nowadays name a child Mary or Jesus? South America, Jesus. Nothing wrong with that if you're not Jewish. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're Jewish, so you become acculturated, you're part of the culture, and you give the child whatever name. Name the child for a name that is one of the saints who murdered Jews. Why would you name him that? Because it's a name. It's a nice American name. I like that name. The Jews weren't in Germany long enough to decide, I like the name Hitler. But you meet Jews named Adolf from Germany. So going forward, she was named Ishtar. That's her name, like David. My parents named me David. And then her real Hebrew name, like mine is Dove, her real Hebrew name was Hadassah. But she didn't go by Hadassah. And she was under instruction from her uncle Mordechai, whom we've been talking about. Don't let them know you're Jewish, even before the beauty contest, if you want to succeed in life. So she went by the name Esther, but her real name was Hadassah. And that's how it came to pass that a zillion years later, the Women's Zionist Organization would look for a role model of some great woman Zionist role model, pre-Zionism, and Hadassah is a. The only irony, of course, is that no one who's a member of Hadassah knows who it's named for. Back to our account. So Esther was Mordechai's niece. And as Mordechai's niece, she followed his instructions. He said, don't let them know you're Jewish. She was called in for her night, and by God's miracle, her handler sent her in on one of the coldest nights of the year in January. She might have been sent in, not January, actually, it would have been the equivalent month of January. In Hebrew, the months of December and January, it's Tevet. Hanukkah comes out late Kislev and early Tevet. She went Tevet. Now she's going to have to sleep with the king. as will the other 353 or 382 or whatever. Doing this as delicately as I can as an Orthodox rabbi, as a proper person, it is less desirable. If you're going to spend one night with each of these women and you're going to come away from the experience with a memory as to which one was best, to sleep with the lady on a hot August night when she's sweating and you're sweating and people don't smell their best, and even the perfume is actually counterproductive if the sweat is versus the coldest night of the year when they don't have indoor heat. They have a fireplace. They don't have indoor heat. They don't have indoor, and you're freezing, and you have 9 blankets, and you're holding anybody who's got 98.6% degree temperature. It increased the probability she would leave behind a better memory. And he was interested in how she was, her appearance, and her parents apparently pleased him. So he named her queen. And now that she's queen, her uncle Mordechai, who continued keeping an eye on her because she was an orphan, he went as close as he could be. The gates. In Eshet Chayil, we sing the song, Noda b'sha'arim ba'ala im zekte, Noda b'sha'arim ba'ala, ziknei aretz. So nothing is a greater honor. The greatest is Ziknei Aretz, the most highly ranked and noble in the land. In those days, would be at the gates of the palace. You couldn't go into the palace. Who are you to go into the palace? It's like trying to get past Secret Service and get into the White House. And that Secret Service normally does a good job. But there are gates, if you've ever been to the White House, there are gates around the White House, gates around Buckingham Palace and all these places. Parliament, British Parliament. And so the highest thing was for the truly noble, Jewish, non-Jewish, the truly noble to sit at the gates. They didn't have to work for a living. They were super rich. And they would spend the day talking. There was no TV. There were no library. Well, maybe there were libraries of a sort, but there weren't many manuscripts before Gutenberg. And there weren't other ways to mass communicate. So people gathered at the gates and they talked to each other. Sort of like in England, these gentlemen's clubs, not like the American gentlemen's clubs, the gentlemen's clubs where the people with titles, all these different titles, everybody in Britain is either a peon who talks like what's her name in My Fair Lady, or is a nobleman, a duke, a third, the third whatever the third duke. I'm on dukes now. Of Worcestershire, of Worcester, of Leicestershire, and so Mordechai hung around at the gates. And he hung around, he talked, and he knew 70 languages, and he talked the local language with a good accent. No one picked up on. And they knew he's Mordechai Hayudi, whether they wore a yarmulke, in those days they wore different kinds of, they knew he's a Jew. He had nothing. How could he hide it? He's the leader of the Jews. So one day he's sitting there, and Bigtan and Teresh, 2 of the king's royal servants, plotted to assassinate the king. And they spoke a foreign language that no one would understand. But they knew that language because they had come to Persia and to work for the king from that small province where the 2 of them had begun. So they knew a language, sort of like those of us who grew up with parents who spoke Yiddish and we didn't. So whenever they wanted to say something to each other in front of us, they would talk Yiddish and we wouldn't know. And then when we got a little bit older, my sister and I, when we wanted to say something in front of them that they shouldn't know, we would talk Hebrew because they knew how to daven, but they didn't know conversational Hebrew. So they talk the foreign language that no one knows, but they didn't know that Mordechai speaks 70 languages, and he knew what they were saying. He knew they were plotting to kill the king and presumably the queen. So he got word to the queen, his niece, and she got word to the king. And he sent out to investigate, is this true? And his investigators determined, indeed, there's a plot to kill you. So Bigtan and Teresh were taken and they were hanged. They were executed. And by the way, clothing is hung, people are hanged. They were hanged. As the royal chronicler, whose job was to write every single thing that happens in the life of the king and maintain many, many volumes of the chronicles of king this or king that, the chronicler put the story that I just shared with you. And he put in the story that the plot was unveiled, exposed by Queen Esther, Ishtar. How did he know? Esther had told him, and Esther told him in the name of her uncle, King, I've learned there's a plot to kill you. I've learned from my uncle. Or maybe she didn't say uncle. That would have given away her religion. I've learned from Mordechai the Jew. It was written in the Chronicles that Mordechai the Jew exposed the plot. And it was filed away. The story continues. Haman wants to kill the Jews. He could have simply decided, I'll kill Mordechai. But because Mordechai would not bow down to him, he decided this is my opportunity as an Amalekite, an Agagite, to kill out the Jews, the whole nation. So he went to the king, who is a lot more evil than the text suggests, and asked permission to kill out all the Jews in the kingdom. That's a big thing. Even if the king hates the Jews, it's going to cause some social unrest. You don't know what's going to happen. If you start to kill out all the Jews in, I don't know, why not Germany? Why not? You never know what that can set off. It could set off a revolution. It could set off, if you try to kill all the Jews in Tsarist Russia, one of these days, the communists are going to rise up against you because they see you're killing people, and sometimes by mistake you kill non-Jews. So he needs permission. The king was only too happy to give him permission and take the royal ring, which was used. They would use a royal ring to stamp on wax, on an envelope like, to create an impression so you knew it was a letter from the royal, with the royal wax. And then they'd use that melted wax to seal the letter. So he gave Haman his ring and said, issue, in other words, any decree you want. He actually gave him, again, think of, just for modern, think of Musk and Doge. And maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, I'm not, but it's like somebody being given a lot of authority. So he was given a lot more. He was basically given authority to do anything. And it's not like the king would even be able, I guess he would be able to overrule him. But the king basically gave him free rein. And Haman explained, I'm going to kill a particular group. Hinei am echad, mefuzar umeforad bein ha'amim, v'lamelech ein shovel hanicham. There is one nation among all those in your 127 provinces who are just all different from all the others. Like every province has its people. In modern example, in India, there are Indians. And in Pakistan, there are Pakistanis. And in Syria, there are Syrians. And in Congo, there are Congolese. And in Argentina, there are So that's what it's like in our 127 provinces. But there's this one people who don't have their own province, but they're spread all over the place. And they don't really matter anywhere because they're so few, but they're different. And they're just a potential problem. Because one of these days, they're liable to convince people in one of your provinces that they know something we don't. And the best thing, just kill them out, because everything else is fine. And the king said, fine. As far as the king was concerned, he was happy to kill them out. But you couldn't say that in the Megillah, or it wouldn't get through. Haman had the approval to kill them. And the only question is what day. So he did a lottery, which the Megillah says they call it a pur, P-U-R, or actually pay vavresh. A lottery, a pur. And so he did a lottery. He took a basket or whatever he used with the names of the 12 months, maybe 13 if it was Adar Bet year, if it was a leap year. And he picked out the month of Adar. And he did another one, numbers 1 to 30, and he pulled out like 13. And so the 13th of Adar is the day we'll kill the Jews. We should be able to get it all done in one day. Think of Kristallnacht. They didn't kill out all the Jews, but we all remember Kristallnacht, November 10, 1938. That'll be the day. December 7, 1941. That was only aiming at a small group. Have never forgotten that day. October 7, 2024. So it'll be the 13th of Adar and another God miracle. The, the, the lottery was at the beginning of April, the beginning of Nisan, the first month of the Jewish calendar. Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah in September is actually the 7th month. It's a long story, another time. The first month is Nisan, that's when it was. And the lottery came out for 13 Adar. It would be like taking a lottery, which day, taking it on January 1 and coming up with December 15. You see what a miracle that is? It gave the Jews maximum amount of time to figure out what to do. Like if it came out in 3 days or 10 days, it came out 11 and a half months later. So it's a miracle. We don't know it. Story goes fast. That's what's going on. And now he's got permission to kill him. Chapter 4, how are we doing on time? We started at 8:30. We have half an hour to go. Chapter 4. The word gets out to all the Jews. People are crying, mourning. Of course they are. Think of the Jewish reaction after October 7. Of course, everybody's in mourning. Everybody's paralyzed with fear. People are in the streets wearing sackcloth, fasting, not as a nation, but individually. The only Jew who's happy and humming a happy song, basically, is Esther, because she's locked up like Rapunzel in the palace. She doesn't know what's going on. She doesn't go outside. There's no TV, no radio, no telephones. It's just another day of crudités. Mordechai doesn't know what to do, so he's just sitting there in the street. Now, there's a rule. He's no longer allowed to sit near the gates. You're not allowed to sit near the gates no matter how noble you are if you're wearing sackcloth. So by rule, he had to be a minimum distance away from the gates. And he was sitting in the streets in sackcloth. Well, the word got back to Esther that her uncle, there was one guy, Hatach, he was assigned as her personal aide, and she confided her story to him, who she is and what she is. And he knew who Mordechai was to her, went to Mordechai, went to Esther and reported, your uncle is sitting in the middle of the street in sackcloth. She sent him to find out why. Mordechai tells him everything. He comes back and tells her everything. She's shocked. I mean, my king is nice to me. He's not that bad a guy. I can't believe it. Really? What should I do? She sends a message back to Mordechai, basically, what should I do? Mordechai sends a message back to her. you have no choice. What you have to do is you have to go to the king, your husband. You have to tell him what he's done. Hopefully he doesn't fully realize, even if he knows he's given the word to exterminate the Jews, Nazi style, perhaps he doesn't know you're a Jew, and maybe that'll do some good. You've got to tell him. She sends back a message, I can't. He has an like a national rule. He's got a rule, a statute. No one is allowed ever to approach the king in the king's chamber unless the king first calls for them. Anyone, even his highest officials and aides, if they walk into his chamber without first having been requested, there's an executioner who stands there whose job is to execute immediately the approaching person. And it almost makes sense in its own crazy way, because in a world of assassinations, if you accept the premise that no one's allowed in that room without first having been called, you never know whether someone suddenly walking in that room without being called is walking in with a knife to assassinate him. We just saw with Bigtan and Teresh that exactly was their plot. She explains, I can't go in to talk to him unless he calls for me, and he hasn't called for me for 30 days. I won't even get to him. On the way in the room to him, I'll be executed. I'll be dead. Mordechai says, you have no choice. We're all going to be dead. You're the only thing we have left, your only chance. And words to live by. And who knows whether the whole reason for all the miracles that have happened till now, you're being favored by that guy. You're getting a middle of the winter night. You're being the queen having been executed, the king having gotten drunk and having her executed. Who knows whether all this was not God's plan leading up so that you would be the one and only person in the world, and certainly in this kingdom, who would be able to save the Jews at this time. And by the way, 10 years ago, we don't think about it this way anymore, but 10 years ago, when Trump was elected 2016, after Obama, we forget how good we had it from 2012 to 2016 under Obama. Obama's final going away gift to the Jews was with Kerry Security Council Resolution 2334 that made it illegal for Israel to be in eastern Jerusalem, at the Kotel, at Beit Lechem, anywhere in Judea, Samaria, even eastern Jerusalem, formally decided by the UN Security Council 2334 at the behest of Obama and Kerry. The only resolution up to then anti-Israel that America did not veto, of course they promoted it. Israel was banned from the Kotel and East Jerusalem. I don't know if you remember that. 1 month later, Trump came in and was moving the American embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv and declaring Jerusalem the eternal capital of Israel, and forget about the United Nations, means nothing. Many of us were saying back then, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we don't know what's going to be. He may be an anti-Semite. We don't know what to make of this guy. Certainly the media were promoting that he's a big anti-Semite and he's a Nazi, if you remember back to 2016 when he was running. And many of us were saying, we're quoting chapter 4 of Megillah, Ivanka. That was the magic word in 2017, January 2017, in the Orthodox world. The magic word was Ivanka. Umi odea. And who knows whether it for just a moment like this that God put in the mind of that very nice lady that of all the things in the world, she wants to become an Orthodox Jew. That of all the people in the world, she falls in love with this Jew. Of all the Jews in the world, instead of falling in love with Drek like an Emhoff, she falls in love with Kushner, that Kushner. Not all the Kushners are like that Kushner. And of all the things in the world, she becomes an Orthodox Jew. Has Orthodox children going to yeshiva. Turns her father into a Zaidi. As many of us have pointed out, what's question and answer? What's the difference between Donald Trump and the leaders of the Anti-Defamation League and the Jewish Federation? Answer: Donald Trump has Jewish grandchildren. And so we would say, who's to say that she did not? Who knows? Now we don't think about it. We take it for granted. What's he going to do good for Israel next? And by the way, there's no guarantees that he won't turn on a dime either, assuming he doesn't ban dimes like pennies. There's no guarantees. There are no guarantees. Never any guarantees. And that's why I tell people, as much as I love him, I don't put my faith in him. I put my faith in God. Back to the story. And so Mordechai says, if you don't do this now, it's true. You may get killed right away. But if you don't do this now, number one, this may be why God put you in that spot. Your entire life may have been simply so that you would grow up to this moment, and the rest of your life, you'll just be very rich and be able to eat whatever you like and wear nice clothes. This is the moment of your life that will decide your life. And if you don't do it, don't be sure that God will not instead send salvation for the Jews from another place. He'll take some other Jew, and that person will save us, or some other leader. And you know what? In the end, you'll be the one that gets killed. Who's to know? And so she says, I hear you. I ask that the entire nation, if I'm going to do this, I ask that the entire nation declare a 3-day fast, no eating, no drinking for 3 days, and 3 days of public prayer, sitting in the streets of the 127 of Persia, of this area, Shushan, in the streets in sackcloth. And so they prayed. And it was, I mentioned that the lottery was the beginning of the month of Nisan, and this was the 13th, 14th, and 15th of Nisan. Everything's moving real quickly. There's a national death warrant has been put out, and we're up to the 13th of the month, and a 3-day fast, 13, 14, 15. What's on the 15th of Nisan? That's the first night of Pesach. That's the Seder night. On the first night of Pesach, as it is, perhaps that's why she asked for a 3-day fast instead of a 1-day fast, to carry it into Pesach. She goes to the king, thoroughly ready to be killed, unless God makes a miracle. And the king sees her, and he reaches towards her with his golden scepter, symbolizing, come closer, come closer. And by reaching out his golden scepter, she comes and she has that moment to talk to him.
I leave you on this day, your regent in my absence, Lord Haman, Prince of the Face. It is my will that each of you obey him in every way exactly as you would regard your king.
That's, of course, Esther rushing to save the Jews before it's too late. There is the king, and he was symbolically designating Haman his viceroy.
summons she comes before the king. She does. Is protocol not broken?
Yes, protocol has been broken down.
It just moves me. Still gets to me. So she risked her life. And of course, that's a movie depiction, a little bit different. It's a private, the Megillah tells it's a private room. It's not that long a walk. It's not, but I wanted you to get that sense of it. Now, what does she tell him when she survives and gets that close? Of all things, she invites him to a wine party. She doesn't tell him that he's killing the Jews. There's not a rush, right? It's April, and she's got till next March. She invites him to a wine party. For that, you risk your life. And she's inviting him. It'll be very romantic, just you and I, and Haman. He can't quite process that, but says, fine. And the next day, they have a very lovely wine party in the palace that she throws, just she and he and Haman. And as he's all full of wine, and you know how he does with wine, and he's in a jolly mood, he says, I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. You can have up to half of my kingdom. In other words, 49.999%. He's not that drunk. And she says, all I want is for you to come tomorrow again with Haman to another wine party. That's all I ask. And as the king goes home, and what's that all about? The Jews are about to be exterminated, and she's planting in the king's mind the seeds of doubt as to whether she's having an affair with Haman and whether they are planning to assassinate him so that Haman becomes the new king. Sort of like Hamlet with the king's wife with his brother, and they end up killing the king. The brother kills the king and the wife, and that's part of the backstory of Hamlet. The king can't sleep that night. It says, "Balayla hahu nadadash nad hamelech." On that night, the king couldn't sleep. As with so much of what I'm teaching you tonight, it doesn't tell the details. He can't sleep because he thinks he's going to be assassinated at tomorrow's wine party, and he doesn't know what to do because maybe he's not going to be assassinated. Maybe it's just a wine party. He doesn't know what's going on. And at that very time, because he can't sleep, he needs something to calm him down, and they don't have Vicodin or Norco. So he asks that his royal annals be read to him, his favorite book, the book about his life. His book reader pulls a volume at random, could have been any volume of his years as king, opens it to a page, could have been any page, of all the, it's almost like Humphrey Bogart or the other in Casablanca, of all the volumes and all the pages and all the paragraphs, opens it to the paragraph that recounts how there had been an assassination plot against him by Bigtan and Teresh, but Mordechai the Jew saved his life by exposing the plot. King hears it. He'd forgotten about Mordechai the Jew. That's the last thing in his mind. But he's having trouble, and it suddenly occurs to him, nobody has warned me about a forthcoming assassination tomorrow. Maybe because there's no assassination, or maybe there is, but people have figured out that the king is not very rewarding. There's nothing to be gained by sticking out your neck and telling the king what's doing. He asks, what was ever given as a reward to Mordechai? And the guys around him say, you never gave him anything. And the king realizes, if I don't give rewards to people for saving my life, but if I do give extraordinary rewards, people have motivation if they hear something. So at that moment, he hears rustling in his back. The rustling is Haman coming in the middle of the night to his palace, excited. He has just built a scaffold with which he's going to hang Mordechai. And he wants to tell the king the good news. Since the king already has approved killing out all the Jews, he'll love that. It's like some German, like Eichmann, even in the middle of the night, coming to Hitler to wake him up, to tell him, guess what, But the king is not thinking about Jews now. The king is thinking about being assassinated by Haman. And Haman comes in, but it's not the wine party. Yes. I'm glad you just came in, because I'd like to ask you a question. If the king, me, wants to give the greatest honor and reward imaginable to someone he likes more than anybody else in the kingdom, what do you recommend I do? Haman thinks he's talking about me. And in Haman's mind, of all the things in the world I'd like, he says, King, Your Honor, Your Royal Majesty, if you want to give the greatest honor possible, you would call that person and honor him. No one is ever allowed to ride on any horse that the king rode on, even in the past, and is never allowed to wear any royal garments that the king ever wore, even in the past. If you want to show the greatest honor, you would invite that person, you would have a horse that you once rode on, have that person invited to ride publicly on that horse wearing royal garments you once wore, and be led through the center of town on the greatest highway, like in Los Angeles, Wilshire Boulevard, or in Orange County, Jamboree, or in New York, Brooklyn Kings Highway, or Broadway, Collins Boulevard, and so on and so forth. And the king hears that, and it only confirms this guy has my throne on his mind. He thinks I'm talking about him. He's thinking not money. He wants royal robes and royal horse. It confirms the king's fear. But for right now, the king says, gather Mordechai the Jew and do everything you just said for him. And Haman, in shock, having understood that he's got the king's okay to hang him, now instead is putting him on the royal horse, royal garments, leading him through town. And the king ordered that he be led by Haman, that Haman be the one leading the horse, and call out, Kacha yeyaseh la'ish asher hamelech hafetz bikaro. Thus may it be, shall it be done to the one whom the king honors. And as he's doing that, and he's walking down the center of town, people are perched over their windows on their upper floors to watch the big parade. I experienced something like that during the year I was in Louisville, Kentucky, clerking for Judge Boggs. On the day of the big Kentucky Derby parade, It was like a Friday or a Monday before the Kentucky Derby to have such a parade with horses. And everybody perches over the windows to see it. So I saw what it's like. She's perched over the horse and she's got a bucket of urine. When they did not have indoor plumbing, everybody had their own pot where they collected urine. It was the way it was done in ancient times. They threw it out the window. You made sure no one's below, and you threw it out there. You got a place smelled. That's what the world was, and everybody got used to it. And so what she did was she saw the approaching horse, and she assumed her father's on the horse, and Mordechai the Jew is the one on the ground, and she pours the bucket of urine on what she understands as Mordechai, but after the guy gets splashed and looks up, she realizes she just did that to a father whom she honors and loves, and in horror, she jumps out the window and kills herself. It says in the Megillah that after this incident, simply says that Haman came home in Avel and Chafui Rosh, that he was in mourning with his head covered. It doesn't spell it out, but the Talmud explains he was in mourning now for his daughter who was dead, and his head was covered with urine. And as he tells his wife and his friends what just happened, they tell him to forget about the gallows. And he's just trying to process all of this. The king's emissaries come in and grab him, saying that it's time for the second wine party. He needs time to change his clothes. He's full. No time. You can't be late for the king. And he comes to that party, and the king is expecting, I might be getting assassinated now. The king is shivering. King is going, he doesn't know what to make of what. Haman is trying to process, if the king likes Mordechai and finds out what I'm up to, I might be dead. And Esther now is in charge without acting that way. And the king says, we're here, we're drinking. What do you want? You can have 49.9% of the kingdom. What else do you want other than that 0.1%? And she says to the king, she waits a while till he's got a lot of alcohol in him. And she knows his reputation when he gets too drunk. And she says, here's the problem. Here's the reason. And unspoken are the words, you thought we were going to kill you? No. Spoken are these words. There's somebody in your kingdom who has determined to destroy me and my family and my people. And if he only were aiming to make us slaves, I wouldn't even bother you. But he's going to murder all of us. And the king says, who? Someone's going to murder you? I love you. You walked up to me. We could have killed you when you walked up without being invited. Instead, I'm here at party and party. Who would want to kill you? And she says, Haman, that evil man. And the king loses everything. He runs out to the porch of the patio, and he's just beside himself. And at that moment, Haman oh my God. He runs to the queen who's sitting on one of those like chaise lounge, like a nice fancy couch. And he's there begging for his life. And he's shaking so much that he accidentally falls on her. And just at that moment, the king happens to walk in, sees her on top of the queen, and screams out, on top of everything else you want my kingdom, and you want to rape my wife in my palace? And one of the king's advisors, the name Charvona, who actually is a friend of Haman, says to the king, and he's planning to hang Mordechai the Jew who saved your life. He's even got the gallows in his backyard. And the king instantly says, Tiluhu alav, hang him on it right away. And as Haman's trying to say, he's out and hanged. And he's dead. And the rabbis asked, Harvona? Harvona was a friend. He was in chapter 1 when they were sitting at that dais getting drunk and would Vashti show up naked. Harvona's a friend of Haman. Why is he handing over Haman? What's in it for him? And the rabbis say, Harvona is not Harvona. That God, by miracle, sent the soul of the prophet Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, to take up the place of Harvona. And it was he who told the king that a gallows for Mordechai is in the backyard. And it was he who gave Haman that helpful push onto the couch. And so the next day, Mordechai and Esther, with Haman out of the way and me finishing up, say to the king, we have one, king says, everything good now? We have one unfinished piece of business. There's a decree. There's an executive order, a royal decree that all Jews are to be massacred on the 13th of Adar. And the king says, well, what do you want me to do? Well, we want you to reverse the decree. He says, well, unfortunately, there's a statute in this kingdom. When the king issues an order, a royal decree, the king's royal decree never may be reversed. Can't do it. Well, what are we going to do? You don't want us killed now. Well, of course not. Here's what I can do. I can issue a second decree that's the opposite of the first decree. The first decree is that all are free to go on this day and murder all Jews, minar v'ad zaken, including children, including elderly people, nashim v'ta, women, and even little babies, like the Bebus redheaded boys. Everybody, all Jews, no mercy. And on top of it, after killing all the Jews, all are invited to take the spoils of all their possessions. I'll issue a second one. All Jews on that day are, by royal decree, permitted to go and kill all people in the kingdom whom the Jews believe hate them. From young to old, women to little babies, and may take all their possessions. So you look at that and you say, well, let's say, God forbid, that were done in Germany, modern Germany. I don't want to put this on America, but let's say, God forbid, modern Germany. They would say all Germans can kill Jews and all Jews can. What percentage of the population are Jews? What percentage of I mean, thanks for nothing. In that kind of everybody can kill everybody, we're not going to come out well. But if you've ever seen, like, Fiddler on the Roof, the scene towards the end where there's the excuse me, where there's the pogrom in Anatevka, it really came home to me as I watched that scene. A pogrom is effective only insofar as the police facilitate it. The police announce pogrom, and when in the judgment of the cops, enough Jews have been killed and enough property has been destroyed and stolen, the cops announce end of pogrom. And any muzhik that hits a Jew after that gets killed by the cops. You're allowed just as much pogrom as the cops, following the Tsar's orders, has allowed. And that's what makes this work. All the police of the kingdom are under orders from Achashverosh to supervise double pogrom by assuring that the Jews can do anything they want and non-Jews may not do anything they want and are to be taken, stopped, and held to be killed. And the Jews kill 500 anti-Semites in the capital city and 75,000 anti-Semites throughout the kingdom. The next day when the Achashverosh says, all done, good, Esther says, I would beg you for one more day in the capital city. We got everybody outside the capital, like Hamas in Gaza. We didn't quite get all of them. We'd like one more crack at them. And the king says, you got it. You get the 14th also. You get an additional crack at them. And that second day, the Jews kill hundreds more anti-Semites. La Yehudim Hayat, the Megillah says, and we use that sentence, we say it every Saturday night at Havdalah. La Yehudim Hayat Ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. And for the Jews, there was light and joy and just reveille in the, and just every kind of celebration and dancing and honor, vikar, and we were the most honored. And the Megillah says non-Jews started converting to Judaism like crazy, going like mityahadim. They started converting to Judaism because the sense was that's the safest spot in this kingdom right now, and the thing that the king is going to support most. So they become, and the Jews, as it concludes, Mordechai and Esther decree, these days never shall be forgotten among our people. This is the holiday that is at the last holiday declared in the Bible, is Purim, Megillat Esther. And it will be marked by, there are four things we do. Because the miracle started with a banquet and took place because of banquets of Esther, King, and Haman, we have a special banquet on Purim Day. This year it'll be Friday. And because it runs into Shabbat, you eat it earlier in the day, like 11 a.m., 1 p.m. You have a nice banquet, no kiddush, no lechem mishnah, no double bread, but a beautiful meal. Second of the four mitzvot is you're supposed to give mishloach manot ishtareyehu. You're supposed to give a food gift, a basket of food to at least one person. And it should be at least two food items. Many people give fancy schmancy with 100, and beautiful, wonderful. And they send it to 20 friends. But the halacha, the law, is you need to give it to one person, at least two foods that need no further preparation. Mishloach manot, in Yiddish, shalach munis. Number 3, so you're supposed to have a festive meal, shalach manas. Number 3, you're supposed to give charity to at least 2 poor people. Matanot le'evyonim. Practically speaking, if you don't know 2 poor people, you can send money to our shul. Our website is YIOC, Young Israel Orange County, YIOC.org, YIOC.org, and mark it for Purim charity. And we will divide all money we pick up, divide it in half, and we've got 2 places we're going to be giving it. Matanot Levyonim. And the fourth and final, or the fourth and first primary mitzvah of Purim is to hear the Megillah read night, Thursday night, and day. Not only at night and day. And to hear it live, not on a YouTube of it. So we'll be reading Thursday night, 7:45 p.m. on Zoom. Friday at 11 a.m. on Zoom. We'll be sending out emails to everyone on our lists to remind you, so you don't have to memorize it now. Thursday, we have the fast of Esther in memory of the 3-day fast that the entire nation did. And that's going to be from 5:50 a.m. to 7:45 p.m. And that'll be in emails too. Our class is over. And I hope it enriches, not only that you felt enriched tonight by learning stuff, but I hope it will enrich your Thursday night Megillah reading experience by knowing the inside story that other people don't get to know, the stuff that couldn't be put in because it would never have gotten past the censors. Before we end, well, we actually end, so you can feel free to go, but for those who would like to stay for a little 5-minute bonus, but you can leave now. I'd like you to feel I'm kind of honest. A 5-minute bonus. When all the people, the anti-Semites, were being killed, especially the 10 sons of Haman, he already is dead, having been hanged by order of the king. The 10 sons of Haman are hanged on 10 gallows. And the text of the Megillah makes that clear, that they were hanged on the gallows. And I want to, and just this I definitely have set up. And if you stay with me a moment, this is one of the most remarkable things. As with everything in Judaism, there's a big argument as to whether it is what it seems to be. But it's a thing. Let's take a look at this. Esther, it's either 8 or 9. I'll take a shot at 8. So, of course, it's 9. Here we go. Chapter 9, the Jews struck at their enemies with a sword, slaying and destroying. They wreaked their will upon their enemies. And that's what I described, the mass killings. And particularly in the capital city of Shushan, the Jews killed a total of 500 men. And particularly, they also hanged Parshandata, Dalphon Aspata. These are the 10 sons of Haman. Parshandata, Dalphon Aspata, Porata, Aldalia, Aridata, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaizata. The 10 sons of Haman, and so on and so forth, the foe of the Jews. But the Jews did not lay hands on the spoil, even though they were permitted to do it. And the Jews did not kill women and children. It says in the fortress Shushan alone, the Jews have killed a total of 500 men. B'Shushani bira hargu hayudim va'abed 500 ish. This is very important. No one picks up on it. Men, not women. Men, grown-ups, not children. Though given permission to kill women, children, and take spoil, the Jews only killed the anti-Semites who wanted to kill them. The 500 in Shushan, plus I think 300 the next, and the 75,000 throughout there. Now, it is noticed as a great curiosity that in every Megillah scroll, like the one I'll be reading from and the one that they've placed here online, the word Parshandata, that name, is spelled with a surprisingly small tav. See how it's small? See if I've got it big enough for you. Just let me be sure you really can see this. Okay. Maybe that helps make it even bigger. Just remember. Okay. Parshandata, that's a tav. Any other small letters? Parmashta has a small shin. Tav, shin. This is every Megillah ever. They copy it and they don't even know why. It's only that we know you're not allowed to make a change for whatever the reason. And finally, Vaizata, this is smallish because a yud is small to begin with. Like here, a yud is small. That's how they make them. But what is really small is the Zion. Zion is smaller than it otherwise would be. So there are mysteriously 3 small letters written in the writing of the names of the 10 sons of Haman who were hanged. Tav, Shin, Zion. Now, in the Jewish calendar, we are now in the year 5785 since creation. In Hebrew, Hey, Tav, Shin, Pei, Hey, 5785. By universal convention, we do not refer the 1,000 number. We just remember it, we know it, but it doesn't change for 1,000 years, so we don't reference it. So instead of writing it as 5785, hey, Tufshin Pei, hey, we call it Tufshin Pei, hey. And that's how we do it. Tufshin Pei, hey. Let's see if I got it here. Just as a nice quick example. Tufshin Pei, hey. There we go. A typical calendar, Tufshin Pei, hey. That's how we do it. Okay. So Tufshin Pei, hey. So somebody somewhere figured this out. Tuf, Shin, Zion. just as Tufshin Pei is 5785, Tav is 400, Shin is 300, together it's 700, Zion is 707. Tuf Shin Zion would be the year 5707. How long ago was 5707 if it now is 5785? Well, forget about the 57, just subtract 7 from 85. 5707, 7 from 85 is 78. What year was it 78 years ago? That was 5707. 78 years ago, let's see, subtract 25, it's 2000, and that's 25 of the 78 leaves 53, if you're still with me. 53 from 2000 is 1947. Or if you like, just subtract 707 from 2025 on your calculator, and you get 1947. 5707 was 1947. We close with these 2 minutes and 50 seconds. And I love this. Everyone loves this. Everyone in all of Yeshiva Judaism around the world for the last 78 years loves this.
Shushan, capital of Persia, 5th century BCE. Haman's final solution for eliminating the Jewish people is almost carried out, but the tables were turned. And the Jews killed the 10 sons of Haman, scourge of the Jews. And Esther said, if the king sees fit, give the Jews leave to do as today, and hang Haman's 10 sons on the gallows tomorrow. If Haman's 10 sons were already killed, why did Queen Esther ask to have them hanged? The sages say that whenever the word king is written, and not specifically King Xerxes, the reference is to the king of the universe, to God himself. Many years later, it became clear that Esther's tomorrow referred to a next day far in the future. 1945. Germany is vanquished, but the Nazis' final solution systematically murders 6 million Jews. When the war ends, leading Nazi criminals were put on trial in Nuremberg. 11 of them were sentenced to death, normally carried out by firing squad or electric chair, but surprisingly the court decides that they would be hanged.
Julius Streicher, death by hanging. Goering, death by hanging.
A few hours after sentencing, Goering commits suicide, leaving 10 remaining war criminals for execution by hanging. Esther asked for 10, and 10 remain. October 1946. The criminals are hanged one by one. Among them was Julius Streicher, described as the Jews' #1 enemy. CBS News reports from the scene.
We all expected that sometime during the procedure, the shout "Heil Hitler" would ring out. Wild-eyed Jew-baiter Julius Streicher bellowed out that greeting and followed it as he climbed the 13 stairs with the words, "Now I go to God." Purim Festival 1946, and now to God.
Astonishingly, the Book of Esther has a strange anomaly. The names of Haman's sons are traditionally written with 3 smaller-sized letters, spelling out Tashaz, the numerical equivalent of the year 1946, the year that the 10 Nazi war criminals...
All that's left to explain is, but Rabbi, you said 1947. Because 1946, the year became 5707 in September. The year became 5707 at Rosh Hashanah, and they were hanged in October, when it was already 5707, exactly as predicted in the Megillah. Have a wonderful week, an easy fast, and I look forward to many of you joining us Purim night when we read Megillah, and Purim day, and Thanks for sticking it out the whole time. I went as quickly as I can, and I tried to keep all my stories to a minimum, except for Purim. Bye-bye.